Crop Talk on Market Journal is supported by Nebraska soybean farmers and their checkoff. Finally today, if you've been out and in the soybean fields lately, you've probably noticed that Japanese beetles have emerged here in Nebraska. This particular pest has been on the rise and seen more frequently around the state over the last several years. Market Journal's Mike Straw brings us this story. Mike.
Japanese beetles, a fairly decently sized beetle. It's got white tufts across its butt. The only thing it's really similar to is sand chafers. They don't have that, but they are attracted to people that are wearing light clothing, so sometimes people get them confused. But Japanese beetle has those distinct white tufts and kind of an emerald green appearance to it. You know, they catch a lot of attention because of how they feed. They feed on the upper part of the canopy. And so just walking around here, it's not hard to find plants that are infested. Or look like they're infested just from those leaves being all chewed up, but the veins still intact. I think it's because they feed on the upper part of the canopy. People see that and they're like, oh man, that's got to be hurting my soybeans so high up in the canopy, so much leaf material missing. And the trouble is it's the whole plant. So you've got to take that plant kind of apart in pieces to really understand, is it going to impact yield? Do I need to spray? Am I at threshold? The key thing is to break this plant into kind of three sections. Top of the canopy, we'll call this top, tear this leaf off, and we'll just take a closer look at this one for a second. We've got three leaves here. This leaf's probably the least defoliated, this one's the most. Between these two it's kind of hard to tell. So we tear off the least and the most and the least defoliated, and we're left with one to evaluate. Now a lot of people look at this leaf and say, oh man, that's really defoliated. But the key thing to do is kind of break this into four sections and slide all the areas that are defoliated into one part. So if I do that, it's probably 10% in this one, maybe 10% or 5% here. We're probably down to 5% here and maybe 10 over here. So overall, probably 10% defoliation. Now we go down to the middle part of the plant. The middle part here, we're going to pull another one. Okay, same rules apply. Most defoliated goes, least defoliated goes, and we're left with this one. That's probably around 2% defoliated, if even. So if we average those two, right now we're at about 7%, and then we'll go to the bottom part of the canopy. So very bottom, we'll pull these off, and almost nothing on any of these leaves, so we can remove the least and most, and we've got a 0. So we're probably around 5% or less defoliation, well below the 20% threshold. But looking at this canopy, you would be hard pressed. You know, lots of people go, oh, I definitely need to treat. And in the top part, we're getting close, but taking into account that whole canopy, we're quite a ways away from threshold. The other key thing is we tend to focus on Japanese beetle because we can see it, but there are a lot of other things out in soybeans. So we've got grasshoppers all over the place out here. People will be seeing them in their fields. We were looking at silver spotted skippers earlier. There's a whole bunch of defoliators, and that actually speaks to how we evaluate them. We want to know what's there. Between beetles and caterpillars, there are a lot of differences in terms of potential going forward into the amount of defoliation. Our leps, our silver spotted skippers, our famous painted lady butterflies or thistle caterpillars that we see every now and then, those tend to feed very little while they're small, and then in the last few instars they feed a lot. So they can kind of surprise us because they spend those last 3 or 4 instars feeding a whole bunch, and growers are like, oh man, they're eating everything in the field. So a sweep net in a field is a great way to know what you have in the field, not just Japanese beetle, but am I seeing other things? And then on top of all this is the weather. So if it's hot and dry, we're not likely to see a lot of entomopathogenic fungi or bacteria knock these populations down. But if it gets wet, that tends to get to those populations, can kill them, or at least knock them down. And so you'll start to see caterpillars kind of drooping on plants, and that's free control, so no need to spray, but it is a bit of a waiting game, and really waiting for thresholds is the most important part.